Good morning, evening, or middle of the night, depending on what side of the pond you're on, and welcome to an extra special League One Squared edition of Across the Pitch. My name is Phil Kennedy. I'm joined by co-hosts Tony Robinson and Ross Davenport today, and we have a very special guest who, this guy's resume is just as impressive as it gets. To start off with, he is the founder and general manager of USL League Two, Real Central, New Jersey. He does his own podcast, League One Fun, which to me is the comprehensive show. If you follow USL League One, you've got to hear this show. And most importantly, he's an Accrington Stanley supporter. So welcome to the show, Ira Jersey. Thank you for coming on the show, Ira.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Great to be here.
I'll tell you what, Phil, I got exhausted listening to that resume.
And that's not even everything. I understand. And let's get this out of the way because I have no idea what this is. Tell us about what is an interest rate strategist. That's something that I read that you do as well.
So I've worked on Wall Street for about 25 years and in financial research. So interest rate strategist, I cover treasury bonds and related interest rate products. So I'm basically a Fed watcher who talks about markets, but my market tends to be an institutional market. So it's mostly for large money managers and the like. So not as much. Everyone always asks me, what's your favorite stock pick? And I'm like, I don't do stocks. I do like 10-year treasury bonds.
So I imagine that your interest in numbers and in business is kind of combined with your love of football is what decided to make you want to get into the business end of the game, I'm guessing.
Well, part of it, the origin story of Real Central, New Jersey is so I've played football since I was 6 years old. I was one of the first I would say we were the first real generation that had a massive amount of people who started to play soccer, and I stuck with it, whereas a lot of my peers, would peel off and concentrate on baseball or football or basketball. But I stuck with soccer. So all the way from the mid 1970s, I met Pele, met Johan Cruyff, and because I grew up on Long Island, so the Cosmos were kind of ever present there, kind of in the late 70s. I went to the UK. I actually studied at the University of Birmingham, did a postgraduate. I had trials with some lower division teams back in the late 80s with Crewe Alexandra, Port Vale, Stoke City, Man City, when they were like in the third division. There was no Premier League back then. That's how old I am. So I've always loved football, and the creating a team was something that was kind of a natural progression. And the reason we're starting it is because there's not a stadium and a lower division soccer or even an MLS team within an hour of where I live. So it was kind of a perfect place in central New Jersey, really to start a club and to try and generate, really grassroots football here.
So it's in the Trenton area of New Jersey. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So we're basically equidistant from Philadelphia and New York when it comes as the crow flies. Based on traffic, it could take you anywhere from an hour to 5 hours to get anywhere to either of those cities. But yeah. So we're going to play just outside of Trenton. It's what's called Mercer County, and it's where Washington crossed to Delaware back in 1776, and it's an area rich with history, but importantly rich with soccer history. Princeton University's here. Bob Bradley, Michael Bradley, Jesse Marsh now at RB Salzburg. He was an assistant coach at Princeton. So, there's a ton of talent and local history here, which really makes it unique that we don't have, high level soccer. So not even a League Two team. So the fourth tier of U.S. soccer, we don't have anything near here. And it's really a big hole that we're trying to fill.
What's the closest team to Ira that people, if they want to go watch a professional team, what's the closest one to you?
So we're about the same distance from Red Bull Arena and also Chester, Pennsylvania, where the Philadelphia Union play. So if you want to see professional soccer, you have to go to one of those two places. In terms of lower division soccer, so what we call pre-professional soccer, those are also about an hour away as well. So you'd have to go like to the Jersey Shore or into Philadelphia proper in order to see the closest teams.
Now, what first brought your club and you in general to our attention is when Daryl from the Total Soccer Show, he tagged across the pitch in a tweet a couple weeks ago. It was kind of like, "Hey, Phil, you got to see this video." And the video is that you guys actually did a promo where you remade a commercial that is very near and dear to the heart of every Accrington Stanley fan. So tell us about how that idea came about.
Sure. So like I mentioned, I in 1988, I had some trials with some teams over in the UK. And at the time, the Accrington Stanley commercial was front and center. And it was even running when I went back to do my postgrad work at the University of Birmingham in the Midlands in 1993-94. And it was still playing, right? So I had seen it all the time. I didn't understand it in 88. So finally in 93, I asked someone, and they told me the joke. I didn't even know who Ian Rush was. And, that's how, how clueless Americans were about soccer in the 80s when it came to the professional game. So, I've since been educated. So when I've always followed Accrington, like when they made it into League Two a number of years ago. What is it, like probably 15 or 20 years ago now?
2006.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So I was close. I really started to follow the team again, and I told my kids like, "Hey, this is this team is like the butt of jokes." So I'm going to take credit for you guys supporting Accrington Stanley on this show, because I asked a question to Daryl and Taylor on the Total Soccer Show, and I said, "Why do my British friends think that Accrington Stanley is funny?" And I kind of did it just to see what they would. I knew, but I wanted to see how they would kind of present it when they looked at the joke, because I knew that Taylor had never seen the commercial before. So that was me kind of introducing him to the Accrington Stanley milk commercial. And so it was a natural extension. Like we were just trying to think of interesting, fun things that my kids could do. And my kids, we always say, who are they when there's a soccer team we don't know? So when we were thinking about interesting ideas and things to kind of get people excited and just make some inside soccery kind of jokes, the Accrington Stanley milk commercial came up, and my kids were like, "Hey, why don't we remake that commercial?" So that's exactly what we did. So one of the early videos that we did kind of to tease the team here in the Trenton area was to, do a "Who Are They" commercial, which my son and my daughter, who both play soccer, were willing to make. And that's where the impetus of that came from.
And you absolutely should almost take 100% credit for sending in that question, because there was somebody that happened to be listening to the show that day. That was me. And after I heard that, Aaron Ayers, who's not on this call, but one of our other co-hosts and founders of the show, him and I had been kicking around the idea of starting a podcast and, finding a lower league English team that we would focus on. And I called him up and I said, "I found the team, Accrington Stanley," and here we are today.
Yeah, it's spectacular. And, the beauty of lower league football, and I've quietly followed some of the teams that I tried out for, is I think it's twofold. I think one, these are journeymen. These are not people who are making the multiples of millions of dollars. They're playing because they enjoy playing, and because they might get paid a living wage, barely in some cases, but it's for the love of the game. And then you can see also some of the people who, move up through the academy. They might play on the first team when they're 18 years old. And then they get bought by a championship team or a Premier League club, or they move over to France, and it's exciting to do that. I mean, I think that's one of the big reasons to follow lower division football, whether it's in the US or in the EFL.
Tony, you would definitely agree with that, because I think when we've interviewed all the Accrington players, that's kind of been the common bond we've come across, is that these are guys playing for the love of the game.
Yeah, I mean, like Ira said, they're making a living. They're not driving Mercedes or big cars, fancy cars like in the players in the Premier League. But one thing, as you say, Phil, is bang on is the passion that they have for the sport, and they're thankful and so happy to be able to make a living at it. I mean, lots of these players that we talk to and on the veteran program that you do, Phil, a lot of them stay in the game simply because of the love of it, and they have to. A lot of those players have to get a job after their playing career because they can't make enough to retire on.
Yeah, it's been so many guys that say, you know what, we get to 35, 36 and have to go get a real job because we didn't get rich. But then they look back and say, you know what, for 15 years, I got to make a living doing the best job in the world. And that's something that you would, Ross, now, just to kind of bring you into the conversation here, you're a color commentator in USL League One for the Greenville Triumph, and certainly that would be third tier. Ira's team is fourth tier, which would be one below yours, but then Ira's show focuses on the league that you commentate on, and certainly I would imagine you get to know some of the players, and that they're probably saying the same thing to you. Isn't that right, Ross?
Oh, for sure. I mean, listen, the League One, Ira's done a great job along with Jason, with bringing attention to League One around the country. And I think I'm quite sure. I'm sure Ira's heard from some. And I think a lot of the players actually listen to the podcast. There's maybe one other sort of semi-amateurish comedy League One podcast, we'll say. But yeah, no, Ira's done a good job of bringing attention to the league for sure.
Yeah, I listened to his episode 72, which was the season preview this morning, and I'll tell you, I know more about USL League One after listening to that show than everything I knew about it combined before that. So.
Listen, and I'm sure I'm not the only commentator that's learned plenty from listening to Ira's podcast as well. I'm sure there's a lot of us out there. I know a bunch of the guys down here at the Vista headquarters, where our games are broadcast from, listen to the show, including Ryan Rose, who produces most of our games. I know gets in touch with Ira and Jason now and again on Twitter. So there's a pretty solid fan base for League One fun.
Yeah, I would say that it's one of those things where it's like you said, Ross, there's nobody else that's doing it right now. So Ira, what made you decide when you started the show that USL League One was going to kind of be your topic of choice?
So there were a couple of things. So firstly, I actually started in about episode 3. So I wasn't actually one of the original founders. There was actually a group of 5 people who first started the show, including Jason. For me, it was, I'd always followed lower league soccer in the U.S. It's now called the USL Championship. For a long time, it was just the USL. And I know a number of people who play in the league, and I've always enjoyed watching these players develop and then end up moving up into the first team. So guys like Tyler Adams, for example, like I remember watching him for Red Bulls 2, and then obviously going to the first team, and then now moving over to Europe to play for Leipzig. And it was a way for me to get really deeply involved in the U.S. soccer landscape and to get to know a lot of the future stars of the game. So, I joined initially, and when I thought there were going to be 5 people, I figured we'd each take like 2 teams and kind of dig deep in 2 teams. But because life got in the way for some of the other guys, it just wound up being me and Jason. So we just do a survey of pretty much every single game. But, it's a matter, it really has to be a labor of love. I mean, just like this podcast, I'm sure, you and Tony, Phil must, what it's like to do a show. It's not an easy thing to put together, but I watch a lot of soccer, and it's something that I enjoy doing. So last season I missed a grand total of 6 matches the whole season, and that was it was fun watching a lot of these games. I mean, some of them were snoozers, but a lot of them were tactically very interesting. I think it's at a better level, quite frankly, than people really think. Like, people don't watch USL League One because maybe it doesn't have, EFL League One as much as they watch the Premier League. And, part of it's just the fan base, and you don't have Raheem Sterling and Paul Pogba playing in those leagues. But it's still a really high quality level of entertaining soccer that can be very tactical. And to a soccer nerd like me, there's no other reason to watch a game than for that nuance.
I think that the Premier League, everything is a bit homogenized, and you get the real proper football, if you will, in the lower leagues. One thing I just wanted to quickly ask, it sounded like Tony had a question, so I'm just going to quickly ask you this. From what I've seen, I would say that USL League One, by English standards, would be somewhere maybe lower table League Two, top end of the conference kind of teams. Would you say that would be about the quality in your observation?
I'm guessing every League Two team would probably crush USL League One teams. Maybe not the very bottom of the table, but there might be some that are good defensively that might. So like a Greenville is a good example that Ross knows, because they're so defensively disciplined that they could probably compete, and maybe avoid relegation in League Two. But my guess is that, and part of this is that, the U.S. soccer landscape is such that our best athletes, unfortunately, in the U.S., wind up on, kind of scattered between multiple sports instead of the best athletes, honing in on basically two sports, like in the UK with rugby and as well as association football. So I think that's part of the issue. The other one is money. The budgets for USL League One, and I know we're going to wind up probably talking a little bit about this later, but the budgets just on salaries are minuscule compared to even League Two and in the EFL. So that's something really that is a hindrance to getting the kind of quality players that you might need to compete in those leagues. Now, do I think that some of the management and some of the people, if they had the same money in League Two, I think some of them could do amazingly well, quite frankly, if they had the same resources that some of the lower division clubs in England have.
Yeah, I would say that that was kind of along the lines where I was thinking, like you said, that they would be struggling for relegation in League Two. And I think the budgets that you bring up are a big part of it, because certainly you're talking about teams in League Two where you have like a Salford City, for instance, that it's coming in and spending a lot of money. And then you have other clubs where you maybe have like a Yeovil, where maybe they're going to have closer to a USL League One budget.
Right, exactly.
Tony, it sounded like you had something a minute ago.
Well, the question I did have is actually you touched on, but there was a couple other comments I just wanted to mention. About watching a lot of football. Is it like in the 80s and 90s? Obviously, we didn't get a lot of coverage over here, so there's a lot more football now. I mean, it's almost like you can watch a match every day, especially now in the Premier League. So I think, for as far as my position is, I'm missed a lot of football watching it in the 80s and 90s. I'm sort of going overboard with it these days and trying to get my feet of it,
No such thing as going overboard. Well,
I'm making up for lost time, I guess. The one thing I wanted to just touch on when Ira was talking about, the League One and the League Two, just last year in Canada, we started the Canadian Premier League, and there was 7 teams that started up in that league. And I'm just wondering if whether Ross and Ira, whether they're familiar with any of that setup, and if so, how would they compare to the USL League One or League Two?
Well, I would say I have not watched 1 minute of the Canadian League as of yet. My focus. There's obviously my team in England is in a bit of a relegation battle at the moment, so that's taking up most of my time, and obviously preparing for the USL League One season. But we obviously saw some teams from American leagues go to play in the Canadian League, and from what I've heard, it seems to be a pretty decent level of football.
Yeah, I think when you look at the caliber, we're talking about comparing those teams, how they would do in England, and I think it would be they'd struggle against League Two teams as well. So I think the caliber of play and the players that they're attracting might be similar to what is in the League One and League Two down in the USL.
League One in particular, I think, because they are professionals, right? So, and quite frankly, they're in a way competing for talent, right? Because some of the better players in Canada, like the best players in Canada, are going to end up probably playing for one of the 3 MLS teams, and maybe playing for, in the case of Toronto, their 2 team, right, which plays in USL League One. Right. So maybe you have the best players. So one of the things that Jason and I were speculating on was, with Toronto 2 not playing in the USL League One season, what some of those players would do and if they would play in the CPL. Jason really, he watched a number of games in the CPL. I've only seen, I think, maybe 2 or 1.5. So I would be a bad judge, but certainly it's any soccer is better than no soccer, and I would love to see, like, that would be an interesting match, right? To have almost a Community Shield kind of match between the winner of League One here and the winner of the CPL.
Yeah, I think one of the things that fascinated me is, and tying with what you're doing, is you're starting a team in 2021, I believe, and where this league started from scratch. So you start 7 teams starting from all at once, and the kind of business model they were looking for intrigued me. And the distances involved, like you've got a team in Halifax and one in BC, it's well over 5,000 kilometers, and these teams are probably are playing in stadiums of 5,000 to 6,000 capacity. So obviously, if you compare to England, they're obviously at the lower end of the business scale. And to me, it's amazing how they've made it through one season, and if they will succeed because of the challenges that they have.
Well, that's the biggest problem with having separate leagues here that aren't regionalized in Canada and the United States both, is the distances are so huge that travel cost winds up being one of the if it's not the second largest part of your budget, it winds up being the third. So because you have to pay so much for that travel, you can't pay for things like better another trainer, or pay your players a little bit more just because of that large cost. Which is, quite frankly, one of the unfortunate things, and one of the issues perhaps with promotion relegation in the US is, how do you regionalize things so you don't have to pay as much money? And that's one of the reasons why something like USL League 2 for us is important for us to kind of fill up this gap in New Jersey, is because we can go on a bus trip to 6 or 7 different teams within 2 hours of where we are. So assuming where the divisional alignment in USL League 2 next year is the same as it was last year, the farthest we'd have to go is 6 hours. But most of the teams, like all of the other teams, are within 2 hours. So it's it's quite manageable, and it's much easier to take a bus. As soon as you have to get on an airplane, it creates not only other logistical problems, but obviously the cost is significantly more.
One thing I did want to ask about that you touched on earlier was the situation with Toronto 2 having to withdraw from USL League One. I also know that there was a match today that had to be suspended. First, I wanted to ask kind of how you guys thought that the league was going to be impacted by Toronto having to drop out, and also, is there any concern that the season is in trouble, or is this kind of just a blip in the roadmap?
Ross, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody was particularly surprised by Toronto dropping out. I think the issue was how late it was in the whole proceeding. I haven't been keeping up with Canada's rules regarding COVID, but obviously USL hadn't seen this coming as far in advance as they perhaps should have. Had a schedule ready to go, and then Toronto bailed out. So yeah, obviously each team has now lost 2 home games. Obviously the revenue loss for those isn't going to be as much as it perhaps would have been with full crowds. But yeah, it's disappointing. I mean, Toronto 2 were an exciting team to watch last year. They scored a lot of goals, and they also shipped out a lot of goals. They have some great young talent, like Petruzza, etc. But it's disappointing. But I mean, the COVID news today was, I think we had to expect something would come out right before the season. I think at almost every league preseason something's jumped up. You just got to hope they can nip it in the bud, and it's just a one-time thing, and it doesn't affect anything anymore from this time on.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the challenge, and is how do you, well, if a team does test a couple of players positive for COVID, how do they deal with the postponement of those games until that particular small outbreak can be dealt with, or the confirmation of the player. So I think everyone's going to have to be extremely flexible, quite frankly. And so far, I think that the teams want to play, because in lower division football, just like Accrington Stanley, they're going to get most of their revenue every single year from butts and seats and the related revenue from that. They don't have big TV deals. They don't get a lot of money from online sales of their merchandise like some of the mega clubs might that are popular globally. So I think that's one of the reasons why I think championship teams and League One teams really wanted to play, because they wanted to make sure that they become the sustainable enterprises. But in fairness, they also want to do it in a responsible way where, I was watching last week, a USL championship game at Louisville, and, people for the most part were very, very spread out in the stadiums. They had a 15,000-ish person stadium, and they had something like 4,000 people in it. So 25% capacity. And it looked like, like I do when I go to the park and, run around a little bit. I mean, everyone's 6 feet apart and being responsible.
I think you brought a big point up that we should just kind of reiterate, is especially if you do follow USL League One or even the USL Championship, these teams are not getting their regular revenue. If you support Greenville Triumph or Tucson FC or Richmond Kickers or any of these USL League One teams, get online, buy a team scarf, buy a kit. These teams need your help, and that's the best way you can support these teams right now.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think part of going to the 16 game, as I mentioned, I think as well, as Ira sort of brought up, is there may be some rescheduled games. I think with the 20 game schedule, I had a sort of quick look at what Greenville had scheduled, and everything was super tight. If they'd had to have moved a game, it was going to make things really difficult. And I was actually a little disappointed to see some of the shots. Obviously, some of these USL stadiums, the fans are particularly close to the pitch. I went to Forward Madison for one Greenville game last year, and I was maybe 6 feet from the touchline in one of the little sort of boxes there, and there was fans this past week at games with no mask on whatsoever, right 6 feet from players, which was a little scary.
Is there like rules in place that sort of take into considerations the social distancing, or what sort of safety measures are going to be put in place for this league this season?
So there's a couple of different ones. So firstly, every team first has to abide by whatever the local regulations are. And then on top of that, the league may or may not have stricter standards than the local municipality where the teams play. So they have over a 50-page document that outlines all of the procedures and processes that need to take place. And a large section of that, actually a majority of it, is about the in stadium and how fans have to be dealt with, and check in and all of the COVID related fan experience kind of issues. The player initiatives, they've US Soccer has some, and USL's been in touch with a whole bunch of medical staff. So this document's not something that was taken in isolation, and they spent quite a long time speaking to us. So we had talked to Stephen Short, who's the vice president for League One in USL, and he discussed kind of the process of them making the document. So and it was heavily influenced by the medical community.
Now I think this might be a good time to kind of pivot into the kind of main topic that we had scheduled for tonight, while we're talking about COVID-19 and some of the different changes that clubs have had to make and things of that nature. One of the things that Tony has been looking at deeply, and I know, Ira, with you being a business guy yourself, this is something that you said you wanted to talk about, was kind of the landscape of how the EFL is going to be moving forward post COVID-19, if you will. And, of course, this isn't a new problem. every year you seem to have 2 or 3 clubs in financial disarray. Of course, we had Barrie go out of business. The situation that's going on in Macclesfield. You have a situation that's going on in Wigan. So it's just been one of those things where it's already been bad. And now with the COVID-19, they're talking about, I guess Boris Johnson said today, maybe fans back in the stadiums by October. But what we really need to do is figure out a long-term solution for the EFL, and whether that be more TV money trickling down to the Premier League. They're discussing salary caps now. And now, Tony, I know that you had made some notes on this, so let's start with you, and then we'll kind of go around and give everybody's thoughts on the business end of the EFL.
Well, yeah, obviously things are going to change, especially in the EFL and the lower leagues. As you mentioned, the TV contracts are just really basically non-existent for League One and League Two in England. And those teams can't operate without the fan base. And if you let's talk about, like, for example, Accrington Stanley, that has probably a fan base of around 2,500. Depending on what team comes into play, if Sunderland comes in, or Ipswich, it might be 4,000 to 5,000. But they rely on that money, and to operate a match without fans, it's just money out of the pocket. And when you're operating on one of the smallest budgets in the entire EFL, you just can't operate without fans. So, there's some talk about, like you said, in October, having fans come in, and do they restrict it on a percentage of the seating is something to be looked at. There's talk about possibility of not allowing away fans, which, in England, obviously it's a big thing, because small country, you get a lot of away fans traveling to the matches. And there's talk about that, which I think would be a big hit for a team like Accrington, because, as I say, in League One, you get some pretty big teams coming in that will bring 1,000, 1,500 to 2,000 fans. And that's just cash money in the pockets. And, as far as, looking at the EFL, they have to do something, whether it's bring money down from the Premier League, which they won't want to part with. But you've got to have some sort of income from the fans, or else there's going to be a lot more teams in the position of Macclesfield, Wigan, and the other teams. They could be just the tip of the iceberg. That's sort of my outlook on it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that you bring up is how much it hurts a team like Accrington. And I know that Andy Holden put some numbers online and said that, basically a third of Accrington's income comes from butts of the seats, if you will, which worked out to about £750,000. And he said, basically on a good year, a bad year, we're finishing plus or minus £100,000. So if we don't have any butts in the seats, we're guaranteed we're going to lose $750,000, which is a lot of money. But then you think of a team like Sunderland and the size of facility that they're running. A team like Sunderland is going to have a cost that's so much higher that a third of their, like you were saying, 2,500 come to an Accrington game. Sunderland's going to be expecting 25,000, which means their operating costs are 10 times as much. So, but to me, this is almost going to kill the bigger clubs worse than the smaller clubs. What are your thoughts on this, Ira?
Well, I think the bigger clubs, I think the bigger issue is really going to be their wage budgets, and how much have they stayed within their budgets. One of the things that I always hear on Twitter is like, why don't they just pay the players more? And they owners would love to do that for the most part, but the problem is your revenues have to match your expenses. Otherwise, you're going to be in debt, and you're going to go the way of Bury, right? You're not going to be able to to survive. And survivability has to be the first thing. Everyone thinks that it's easy to run a soccer team. And I can tell you as someone who's, starting one, is that the soccer side, quite frankly, is easy. I mean, at least relative to, getting the butts in the seats. Now, you bring up Sunderland, which is an interesting case because, they're a big club that, is probably still going to have a fair amount of support. But, they overspent and underdelivered. So, the fans get angry and maybe they don't spend as much on jerseys or something because the performance hasn't been well. But again, that's incremental, and you have to plan on that in your budgeting process. So it's really, the problem with football, I think, in many respects, especially outside the U.S. So in the U.S., it's kind of a new thing. In the case of Accrington Stanley, right, you've had a team that, with the exception of a little hiatus there for a few years, right before I was born, the clubs existed for over 120 years or 130 odd years. So so it's really part of the community, and everyone wants it to survive and wants it to exist. But it's hard to do that without money, and that's the single biggest thing. So this is. You mentioned this before, Phil, like, supporting your local soccer club, football club is the most important thing that you can do to help them survive. And that's just going to the games and buying buying some concessions at the match and buying jerseys and buying scarves. Those are the things that you really need to do in order for these clubs to survive. And then be patient, right? So if a club is not performing well, but let's say that they have, 3 really promising young players who get beat up because they're, 17 years old, debuting in League One. Well, be patient, because maybe in a year or two, one of those guys gets sold for £5 million. And the next thing you know, like you said, that could be 2 years of their operating budget for the whole club. So, that's what you have to support, I think. And that's really the I don't want to say that's necessarily the business model for a lot of these teams, but for some of them it certainly is. And I think, in Accrington is an interesting example of, that possibility. Find those local talent, help scout local players in the playground who, might be good enough to play for their academy. I mean, that's everything that you should try and do to help your local club.
I'm glad that you brought up the aspect of selling off players and the academies, because I was on a call with Rick Schatz, who's the head coach of Phoenix Rising, on his media call last week. And that was something that he was mentioning, is that with lower division clubs, once you get the academy going, the ultimate goal of the academy is to be able to create players, sell off those players, and then make enough money to be able to kind of pay the budget of the first team. And that's the business model if you're a small club, because those academy players that you bring up, they ultimately have the ability to be your product, if you will, that becomes your most valuable commodity.
Oh, I think we've seen that with Accrington a couple of seasons ago when they sold 2 players. And they brought in about £2 million, which was basically their operating budget, just under their operating budget for the entire year. I mean, that's a lifeline for small clubs, and the academy allows the teams to develop the players, and it is part of the business model. You develop your players, they play for your team, and if they're good enough, you sell them on and finance the next round of players. But I think one of the things I think that in League One and League Two, I think we'll see in coming up, and it may stay if they implement it one season, is a hard salary cap that we mentioned before. And there's some talk about around 2.5 million pounds for League One. That's in line with what Stanley's budget is generally anyway. Where it will hurt is it's going to be a big impact on the big clubs, which Sunderland and teams of that nature.
Portsmouth.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to make Accrington, should make them a more competitive team, because they should be in a chance to get signed players that normally would command a higher wage. they can't get a job because of the salary cap, and so they may turn to smaller budget clubs, which it might make the on the playing surface more equal, but it's certainly going to hurt the big clubs if they do come in with a salary cap.
Yeah, this was something a number of Pompey fans that I talked to said that loss at the playoffs particularly hurt, because this was kind of the last year that they're going to get to spend more than everybody else, and that like you said, it is a level playing field, and then kind of turning back then to this side of the pond, a hard salary cap is certainly something that's a very American concept. That's going to be introduced into English football. Ira and Ross, do you guys think that the hard salary cap is something that we're going to start seeing more in association football worldwide, or in England at least?
Oh, man. I mean, coming from Bournemouth, playing Manchester City in our last game, and I was actually looking at some of the salaries. I think it's a ridiculous situation, and what some of these teams like in the top six are paying their players. I think it might be difficult on the soccer side of things, just with some of the central contracts and the way MLS is sort of set up. I can perhaps see it. We've also got the situation on the UK side of things, where rugby now has a salary cap, but they're having to reduce it going into next season. A lot of teams, players have said, well, we're under contract now. Why are we suddenly being forced to take a pay cut? And the team's saying, well, look, the league's forcing a salary cap cut on us. We're going to have to force it onto you. But players are saying we've got a contract. There's a lot of interesting chat going around on the UK side of things, on the rugby side as well. I mean, I don't think we have to worry about it too much on the USL side, just because of the lack of overall revenue. I don't think teams could. I mean, I guess you could have a millionaire come in and spend a ton of money, but in the end, USL, revenue-wise is where it's at. I don't think there's going to be a huge raise in that, no matter how much money you put in.
At Phoenix Rising, I mean, if you look at their ownership, if they wanted to, they could probably spend more money than they are, even if they are already probably outspending the rest of the USL. Right. But yeah, I agree, definitely. Yeah, To me, until you at least don't have teams playing on baseball fields in the championship anymore, we're probably safe on not having Mesut Ozil come over and sign for Phoenix or anything like that.
Are there any left in the championship, actually? With Louisville getting their own stadium now, is there anyone left who's playing on baseball?
Tulsa.
Oh, Tulsa, right. Yeah, I'm an I'm an Eastern Conference guy, so I don't watch a whole lot of Western Conference.
And then you have the NFL football gridiron.
Well, that we definitely have. Yeah.
Yeah, that I tell you, it's just a standard AstroTurf field, kind of like what you'd see in Atlanta, but with those football lines painted on it, I could not even imagine how the players know where the ball's going to be.
Oh, it's easier than you think. I mean, I play there regularly on in my men's league, and you believe it or not, you easily get used to what lines. And in fact, in lower division football, because of where the stadiums are, we have to play with the American football lines in the league that we're going to be in, where we're going to be playing in our team, and a preponderance of the teams in USL League 2 and some of the competing fourth division leagues, they also tend to play on lines with American football fields, because that's where you can get the amenities that you need to run a good match day experience, right? That's where you have the stands, that's where you have the press boxes, and there's only so many stadium to go around, because soccer's not as ubiquitous here as it is in most other countries in the world. So because of that, you have to kind of live within the constraints of what you have available. In a perfect world, I'd love to, like our first thought when we did this was to play on the soccer specific pitch at Princeton University, but they're tearing that down to build student housing. So that wasn't an option. And that's the unfortunate reality that we would have to go half an hour away in order to find a soccer specific stadium that had the amenities we needed.
Yeah, that's an excellent
bigger problem.
point.
I think with the football pitches, well, I see American football pitches, is not so much the lines, it's the width. I know we have issues down here in Florida. I'm a rugby guy as well, and we play a lot of rugby on American football pitches, and the width just isn't there. And as Ira knows, when it comes to narrow, nobody wants to see narrow football. I think that's almost a bigger problem than that, just the lines.
Yeah, that's very true, and especially the pitches that are inside a track. So for us, we're playing at the College of New Jersey, where there's not a track around it. So we have a proper 120 by 72 yard pitch. And that was a big selling point, as opposed to playing at some of the other venues that we considered was just having that full size pitch.
What sort of capacity would you have in that stadium, Ira?
So we're going to be very lucky. We have one of the larger capacities, I think, within certainly our division. We can have up to 6,500 when it's not social distancing and everything. So I think for us, it'd be fantastic to have 6,000 fans a game, obviously, but we're hoping for 1,000 the first year, and then hopefully grow that a little bit. Most of the more successful clubs have 1,000-ish plus or minus teams per match. Lionsbridge FC down in Virginia, they had the highest average in the Eastern Conference with about 1,500. Fans per match coming through the gate. That's paid fans. And big games like the finals last year in USL League 2, they had over 7,000 people at the stadium over in a university stadium in Michigan. So the game is growing, and certainly at the grassroots level, that's true too. But I think you really need to make a compelling experience, and people like going to championship games. Obviously, that's always fun. But even just your everyday Friday night match will if it draws 1,000 people locally, that's a home run for us.
And just so I'm clear, and I'm asking this from sort of outside looking in, there's no promotion relegation between League One and USL 2, right?
No, that's correct. Yeah. So USL League 2 is different than League One in the Championship, which also do not have promotion relegation. They are closed systems. So you basically buy a franchise from the USL, and then you own your team and control your team, but you play in the league that you paid for. And League 2 is primarily a summer league. So the league season is May to late July, early August, when you can have college players come. So basically it's mostly college players and some of the best college players, but you can have some overage players, some guys who are looking to get back into playing. Maybe they were injured. We're actually in our club actually talking to some former pros who were in their mid-20s, and they weren't making a lot of money playing in the lower professional division. So they're going to have other jobs, but they're likely to play for us, we hope. So, and then we have youth players. So one of the nice things, and certainly a big push that the USL is making, and something that we're taking to heart, is having youth players play with us. So these are high school kids, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who, are looking to go to college, or maybe they're committed to going to college, and they're going to be playing with us. So they're going to be playing with 22 and 23-year-olds, guys who have done it, guys who have been playing at Division I, university soccer. In our case, hopefully maybe an ex pro or two as well there, to kind of guide these kids as they move along. And then hopefully they'll come back and play for us the next summer, because in our league, it is amateur. We don't pay our players. So that's a big cost savings for us, but it's also a short season. It's only 14 matches plus playoffs, because we're an American league. So therefore there has to be playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, kind of the last thing that I wanted to wrap up with tonight, and I did listen to your episode 72, Ira, so I already have a little bit of an idea of what you think, but this is something that I wanted you and Ross to maybe debate a little bit. Go ahead and tell us who we can expect to meet in the USL League One championship game, and why.
Well, so I'm going to let Ross talk about the Greenville Triumph, because he did the color commentary there. The Greenville last year made the finals, and quite frankly was not a little bit, I'm not going to say unlucky, but, it was one of these things where they could have gone up 1-0, had, a player shot low instead of high. And so they were in the finals last year against North Texas, which is the reserve team for FC Dallas, and which has a very good academy program. So they were quite good all year. So I had picked the Richmond Kickers, which is a venerable club in terms of the U.S. They're the longest operating professional outdoor club. They started play in 1993. So just to give you an idea about, I should say, continuously operating clubs since 1993, which compared to a lot of the clubs in the UK, it's they're infants. So I think that they're hungry. I think that the club with Darren Sawatsky, who's their new coach, I think he's going to be able to get a team that really underperformed last year, just kind of kicking on all cylinders, and will make the finals. I've been made fun of for that call because that team came in 9th place last year and they don't have necessarily a natural striker. But I don't think that they played that as well as the talent that they had. So if Coach Sawatsky can get them going, I think that Richmond has a good shot. I think Ross can talk a little bit more about Greenville and their style of play, but Coach John Harkes, who was a U.S. men's national team player for a long time, he has them as a machine, and they didn't lose any major pieces. And most of the major pieces that they did lose, they had like for like replacements that they were able to bring in. And Ross could talk more about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I went back and watched the highlights of the championship game earlier this week, and you really watched that game and you realize how close they were. I mean, they dominated the shot percentages and they really had some quality chances. Of course, North Texas had a goalkeeper. I think he only played 3 or 4 times during the season. Very experienced.
He played exactly 5 because you had to play 5 in order to play in the playoffs.
That's right. Yeah, I'm sure they knew that too. Experienced guy. They brought him in and he made some key saves. But yeah, Greenville, as the color guys, a little frustrating sometimes because they don't play a particularly, well, I would say the first half of last season, we didn't play a particularly entertaining style of soccer, but it was an effective one. We took a little while to get going on the goal scoring side of things. But listen, John Harkes knows what he's doing. And as you said, Ira, we lost sort of 2 key starters in Cole Seiler and Kevin Politz. Kevin Politz was starting it. Yeah, he was starting in a back 3 today. I saw for Hartford Athletic. I didn't see what the final score in that game was, but we had a couple of guys, I'll say, get promoted to USL Championship. But we brought in the likes of Brandon Fricky, Omar Mohamed's brother, who's a capable defender, and Alex Morel from Tormenta. I think Tormenta will be in the mix again. I know they got off to a great start last season, and then injuries really hurt. Loss of Lucas Coutinho. John Milarese is a nice coach, and he has them playing some real good soccer. We obviously lost the first game ever in League One history to them 1-0, but we ended up in the championship game. And I think Greenville, I think Jason and Ira both agree that Greenville ready to take that next step and win the championship game. But this league, the turnover, I mean, I was just doing some prep work today for the game next weekend against Richmond and just seeing some of the turnover obviously they've had with a new coach as well. But their back 4 is, the center backs will be back. Waha Bakwe is a really good center back. But in this league, I don't know how Ira and Jason even do it, because you've got 3 brand new teams in Omaha, Fort Lauderdale, and then in Revolution 2, and 5 new coaches. I think only 3 of the 4 of the teams have coaches coming back. It's just such an entirely difficult system to figure out and what's going to happen. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows, other than perhaps Greenville and Tormenta. At North Texas, we're not sure. They've lost a bunch of key guys. I think Tormenta will be fine, but yeah, I don't know how you and Jason did it, Ira, but it's trying to predict much more than perhaps Greenville and North Texas, perhaps being up there again, depending on who they were able to bring down from FC Dallas, considering that they obviously didn't play in this shortened MLS season because of the COVID problems there. I think Ford Madison and Ira's favorite player, Eric Leonard, will be there or thereabouts. But them leaving their home stadium and the big crowds that they used to get there, and they're such a big. I mean, that was the one game I went to in person last year, and I was amazed at the crowd there and the impact that they had on that game. And now moving 40 minutes away to Milwaukee, because they're not able to have soccer in Madison at the moment, may have a big impact on them and a lower crowd. I still think the fans will travel, but obviously they're only going to have a certain amount of fans to be allowed in there in Milwaukee. But yeah, no, I really like Greenville's chances of taking that next step, as Ira said.
Well, I'll tell you, there's 3 USL League One teams there that I like. One is Tucson because they're Phoenix's farm team. One is Greenville because of Ross, and then the other one is Richmond because of, like Ira said, just their history of being the oldest professional team. So I'd be okay with a Richmond-Greenville final and let the best team win.
Well, we'll see each other obviously next week in Greenville's home opener. So, yeah, we'll get a good look at both teams early on. I think, obviously, teams like Greenville, they got off to a slow start last season. They can't really afford to do that this year with only the 16 games, but I think Harks will have them ready to go.
And that'll be on ESPN Plus, right?
And correct. Yeah, it'll all be on ESPN Plus. Greenville and Richmond, by the way, will play each other 4 times in the 16 matches. So a quarter of the games will be between them, but primarily to limit travel, and because those two are relatively close together. So it's a bus trip again instead of people having to get on airplanes.
Well, that was with the old system, Ira. I think with the 16 game now, we actually play everybody now. We play 6 teams home and away, and then we play.
Oh, is it only one extra game against Greenville? Maybe it's one.
Yeah, I think we only play Richmond once. We played the other 6 teams home and away for 12 games, and then we play the other 4 teams either home or away. So I think we only played them once this year. I mean, sorry, the home and away, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't study the new, literally almost within the last couple of hours we got
changes by the day.
I mean,
the hour.
Last year was just sort of it wasn't an unbalanced schedule for certain teams. But I mean, I think we played Lansing like 3 times in the first 8 games last season and never saw them again. Obviously, until
you beat them in the semifinals.
Yeah. So we were almost 2 completely different teams at that point. So I like the way they've changed things and balanced it up a little bit more than it was before. Because seeing Richmond 4 times, especially with me having to do 2 of them.
Well, I know it's getting late for you guys over on the East Coast, so we won't keep you guys too much longer. I'm over here in Arizona where it's 7 p.m. I know it's 10 p.m. now for all of you guys.
Took a nap. I'm good.
Ira, it has absolutely been a pleasure having you on the show, and I know that we probably talked about 20% of what I had written down that we could have gone over with you here today in about an hour. So we'll definitely have to do this again, and thank you again for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure, Phil. It was great being here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you, Ira. I learned a lot about what you're going through, and all the best. And I look forward to talking to you again once you get the team up and running.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tony and Ross, thank you for joining me today. This is a little different crew than we normally put together, but I figured that we were going to be talking about, like Ira said at the beginning, 2 different League Ones. So we had our League One England expert, Tony, and our USL League One expert, Ross, on today. It's kind of funny where this show has kind of evolved the opposite of yours. I know, Ira, you said you started with 5 hosts and it went down to 2, where we started off with 2 hosts, and now Darren Woodhead, who's another one of our co-hosts, has joked that our cast has grown bigger than the cast of Ben-Hur. We've had a lot of fun, and I will look forward to listening to your League One Fun podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts. And before we wrap up, why don't you just tell people where we can find you, your club, and your podcast on Twitter?
Yeah, thanks very much. So the podcast is at League One. That's the number 1 fun. I can be found at Ira Jersey. That's IRA Jersey, like the state. And the club on Twitter and Instagram is at Real Central NJ.
Excellent. And since we have several Accrington Stanley fans on the line, one thing that we like to do is finish up an episode with an on Stanley on. So I don't know if Ross will be on this or not, but otherwise, let's give a count of 1, 2, 3. On Stanley on.
I'll just give it up the cherries.